Okay, let's jump into this deep dive. We're looking at a global scene that feels, well, pretty pressured right now, wouldn't you say? Trade, cooperation,
Mm,
it's all in flux.
definitely. And the sources we have really zoom in on a couple of key flashpoints. You've got these renewed trade tensions heating up, especially with the EU.
Right.
And then, maybe more surprisingly, how that connects or maybe runs parallel to this whole other competition, the one for, global talent science research.
Yeah, exactly. So our job here basically is to sift through all this information, the reports, the statements, and figure out what's really driving things. What are the key takeaways?
And you'll see how actions in one area, like trade tariffs, can send ripples into completely different zones. Like, who knew trade policy could end up influencing university funding debates or where top scientists choose to live?
We'll definitely pull out some specifics, maybe some direct quotes and reactions too.
Sounds good.
So let's kick off with the big headline grabber, according to the sources anyway. This potential major tariff increase on goods from Europe. What are we looking at?
Well, the recommendation being discussed is pretty hefty. A straight 50% tariff on the EU.
50%. Wow.
Yeah. And the timing mentioned is soon, like possibly June 1st, soon. This apparently follows some posts on Truth Social where President Trump said talks with the EU were basically going nowhere.
Okay, so the rationale presented, his view, is that the EU exists pretty much just to exploit the US on trade. Is that the core idea?
That's the perspective laid out in the sources, yes. And it's contrasted quite sharply, actually, with how he describes talks with other partners.
Like who?
China, where a deal was signed. India, he says, is far along. And he mentions numerous Asian countries bringing very good deals. The implication is that most key trading partners, barring the EU, are negotiating in very good faith.
Hmm. So the EU is really being singled out here in this narrative, and the timeline for sorting this out sounds uncertain.
Very uncertain. He apparently mused about whether it's a summer battle, could drag into the fall, or maybe even stretch into 2026, so lots of unpredictability there.
Now, the age-old question with tariffs, and your sources mention President Trump has given different answers on this. Who actually pays?
Right, that's crucial. And the sources reflect a few different scenarios he's outlined. Sometimes the suggestion is the foreign country just eats it, absorbs the cost.
Okay.
Other times, the idea is U.S. businesses, maybe big retailers like Walmart, they eat it through lower profits. And then, yes, he also acknowledges that sometimes the consumer pays something extra. So no single definitive answer presented.
And he pushes back on the idea that tariffs automatically mean inflation.
He does, quite strongly. He points to the tariffs placed on China, a few years back, hundreds of billions of dollars worth,
Yeah.
and claims there was no inflation and no big cost differential as a result. That's his argument based on that experience.
Okay. So you float a 50% tariff recommendation, maybe starting June 1st. What did the markets do? The sources must cover the immediate fallout.
Oh, yeah, instantly. One source called it opening a new front in the global trade tensions. And, well, predictably, it triggered a fresh wave of market uncertainty. Big drops, significant drops. U.S. stocks fell, looked like they were heading for a weekly loss. Dow futures were down, what was it, around 650 points?
Ouch.
NASDAQ futures down near 400. S&P futures down about 92. And it wasn't just the U.S. European markets were also reported as down significantly. A very clear negative reaction.
Okay. That paints a clear picture on the trade front, at least for now. But then the sources shift, right,
Yeah.
to this other arena of global competition. Less about goods, more about brains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The battle for talent. And this is where you really see those ripple effects we talked about. It seems some U.S. policy moves, maybe domestic ones this time, are creating openings for others.
And Europe specifically is making what the sources call monumental strides to jump on this.
That's the language used. France and the EU jointly announced a really substantial package, €500 million worth of incentives for researchers.
€500 million just for attracting researchers.
That's the plan, yeah. It's a €500 million package for the 2025-2027 period.
And the goal is pretty explicit.
Oh, very. To make Europe a magnet for researchers. To support the best and the brightest, fund their projects, and even help universities with the costs of bringing these scientists over from abroad. It's a very targeted play for top talent.
What kind of specific incentives are in that €500 million pot?
They're getting quite granular. For instance, there's a new 7-year super grant coming via the European Research Council, the ERC. The idea is to offer more long-term stability.
Makes sense.
And they're also doubling the relocation top-up support that's extra cash on top of the main grant to help with moving costs. doubling it this year, and planning to keep that higher level for 26 and 27 too.
So real money on the table to make moving easier.
Definitely. These are tangible financial carrots.
And the context provided in the sources. It links this European push directly to things happening in the U.S., specifically regarding universities.
That's precisely the framing. It's presented as Europe aiming to, and I quote, profit from Trump's federal funding cuts and clashes with top U.S. universities, which naturally brings us back to what's been happening stateside.
Right, because the sources also detail some of those clashes, actions targeting U.S. universities. This isn't entirely new territory, is it?
No, the material notes that universities were targeted during his previous term as well. Things like freezing federal funds, launching investigations, actions related to international student visas, making demands, that kind of thing.
And more recently, Harvard University has been in the spotlight, including a threat to its tax-exempt status.
Yes, exactly. He stated he'd revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status, a move Harvard, in turn, called an unlawful misuse of the U.S. tax code. There are also comments about Harvard's endowment, $52 billion, questioning why the U.S. government provides support implied through tax status or otherwise, while students face significant loan debt.
But these actions haven't all gone smoothly. There's been pushback mentioned in the sources, too.
Absolutely. You have international reactions, like French President Macron expressing surprise. He's quoted questioning why the U.S., which he sees as reliant on free science and innovation, would make such an error.
Interesting perspective. And legally, there was a challenge regarding international students.
A significant one. A federal judge, Allison Burroughs, stepped in with a temporary restraining order
To stop what, exactly?
to block an administration move aimed at preventing Harvard from enrolling international students. The sources mentioned that the DHS had apparently told current visa holders they'd need to transfer to another university to stay legal.
Wow, that's disruptive. How many students are we talking about at Harvard?
Nearly 7,000 international students. That's around 27% of their entire student body. So yeah, that court order was a pretty big deal, at least for the time being.
The sources also included some pretty pointed commentary on the overall situation for U.S. universities under these policies.
They did. The commentary described these actions as attacks, raised questions about consistency with advocating for free speech, and voiced concerns about potential long-term negative consequences. Phrases like living with these consequences and concerns about the future for our children were used. These are clearly perspectives highlighted within the source material itself.
Okay, so let's tie these threads together. We have the proposed EU tariffs shaking up markets, and then we have this parallel track. U.S. policies impacting universities and talent flow, and Europe responding with a major initiative to attract researchers.
And the connection seems to be this idea of global competition playing out on multiple levels. It's not just about goods anymore. Europe, according to these sources, sees a strategic opportunity in the current U.S. environment.
An opportunity created by friction over trade, maybe, but also by these domestic policy battles involving universities.
Precisely. It's framed as Europe potentially gaining an intellectual windfall, attracting the best in the business, possibly individuals who might have chosen the U.S. before, or might even be reconsidering staying in the U.S. now.
So stepping back, why should you, our listener, care about this tangled web of tariffs, market swings, and recruitment grants for scientists?
Well, I think it really highlights how interconnected everything is. Trade policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It affects markets, sure, but it also exists alongside and can influence these broader currents of international relations and competition.
And policies that seem purely domestic, like those affecting universities?
Can have huge global repercussions. They can influence where the next big scientific breakthroughs happen, where innovation clusters form, and where the world's brightest minds decide to build their careers. It signals shifts in global power dynamics, potentially.
It really underscores that global competition today is multifaceted, isn't it? It's not just about manufacturing costs.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's increasingly about attracting and retaining intellectual capital, the people who will drive future industries.
Okay. So to recap our deep dive based on these sources, we've looked at the proposed steep tariffs on the EU, the market's nervous reaction, and then the strategic countermove by Europe rolling out the red carpet for researchers, seemingly in direct response to U.S. policies affecting its own universities.
It really paints a picture of countries actively maneuvering, looking for advantages on, well, multiple chessboards at once.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to chew on. If the global game isn't just about who ships the most goods, but also about who attracts the sharpest minds, What does that tell us about the real long-term measures of a nation's strength and competitiveness on the world stage? Something to consider as these trends continue to play out.